I remember that evening as if it were etched in my chest, the faint scent of champagne, the soft hum of conversation, the polite clinking of glasses. My promotion party was supposed to be a celebration, a recognition of years of late nights, careful planning, and quiet sacrifices no one had seen. Instead, it began with a reminder of how fragile trust can be, even in a room full of people who were supposed to be on your side. I had arrived early, as usual, making sure every detail was in place. The banners were hung just so, the appetizers laid out in neat rows, the music low enough for conversation, but lively enough to hint at celebration. I had always been meticulous, the kind of person who noticed small details that no one else did. Maybe that's why I thought people would notice me. Not just my work, but me. The room filled gradually, colleagues, old mentors, a few friends I had quietly invited. The laughter was polite, the congratulations formal. I felt a light swell of pride, followed immediately by a familiar, uncomfortable tightness in my chest. I had learned early in life that recognition could be as painful as it was sweet. Sometimes people would smile at your success, but their eyes told another story, one filled with doubt or envy. And then came the toast. My boss raised his glass, his smile wide, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. To her, he said, his voice carrying easily over the soft chatter, the newest manager on the team. She's ambitious, brave even. Let's see if she lasts a month. The words landed on me like a cold, unexpected gust of wind. The room froze for a heartbeat, as if everyone was waiting to see my reaction. Some people shifted awkwardly, some smiled nervously. My heart pounded, but I forced a small smile and raised my glass. "Thank you," I said softly, keeping my voice steady, polite, calm. Nothing about me betrayed the sting I felt. Inside, however, my emotions were a storm. Confusion, hurt, and disbelief tangled with a faint, simmering anger. How could someone I trusted, someone who had praised my work and shared in my victories, say something so deliberately undermining in front of everyone? The betrayal didn't feel like a sharp knife. It was more subtle, like frost creeping over the surface of a lake you thought was safe to walk on. I swallowed the urge to respond, to argue, to demand respect publicly. I had learned, painfully, that silence could be a more powerful response than words. People often reveal themselves in their own time. Reacting immediately might have given him the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Instead, I chose a measured nod, a quiet sip of my champagne, and an inward vow: I would not let this define me. The party continued, but everything had shifted. Each conversation felt distant, every laugh hollow. I noticed things I had never paid attention to before: the sideways glances, the slightly forced compliments, the quiet comparisons. I realized how often subtle words can wound more than loud accusations. It was not the first time I had been underestimated, and it would not be the last. Still, the sting of it made my chest ache. As I walked through the room offering polite thanks to colleagues and friends who had genuinely come to celebrate, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The applause around me seemed almost unreal, like a backdrop to a scene that was mine alone to witness. I realized then that my path forward would not be dictated by the expectations or doubts of others. The trust I placed in people could be broken, yes, but the trust I placed in myself could not. By the end of the evening, I was tired, not from the celebration, but from holding myself together, from standing calm while a part of me wanted to shatter the delicate facade. I left the party quietly, thanking a few close friends on the way out, my mind buzzing not with anger, but with thought, observation, strategy. I had learned that people reveal themselves slowly, often when you least expect it. And if I wanted to protect myself, to succeed on my own terms, I needed to watch, wait, and trust only what I could verify. Walking to my car that night, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, I realized something fundamental. Betrayal wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came wrapped in smiles, champagne, and polite applause. And sometimes the only way to rise above it was to carry yourself with quiet dignity, letting your actions speak louder than the cruel words of others. I drove home that night with a strange mixture of pain and resolve. I knew the next few weeks would test me in ways I hadn't anticipated, and somehow I felt ready. The days after the party were strange, oddly quiet, almost surreal. Everyone acted as if nothing had happened, as if the toast had been a harmless joke. My inbox overflowed with congratulatory emails and messages from colleagues praising my new role. But behind each word I sensed something unspoken, like a shadow lingering just at the edge of the room. I arrived at the office that Monday morning, trying to shake the memory of my boss's words. I moved through the day with careful composure, greeting colleagues with polite smiles, taking notes in meetings, and doing my work with the meticulousness I had always carried as armor. But inside, I felt raw, like a wound that refused to scab over. The sting of public doubt, the humiliation wrapped in applause, was still there, and I could feel it whenever I remembered the sound of that voice and the smirk that followed. Over the next week, I paid closer attention than ever before. I noticed small things I had ignored before, the way my boss lingered at my desk during meetings, asking questions that seemed casual but were laced with judgment, the quiet comments colleagues made when they assumed I wasn't listening, the subtle comparisons drawn between me and my predecessor, who had left abruptly months ago. Each observation chipped away at the comforting illusion I had held about my workplace, that merit alone would shield me from scrutiny, that hard work would always be enough. I remembered what my mother had once told me when I was younger. People will always try to test your patience. How you respond defines who you are, not what they say. I clutched that thought like a lifeline. The temptation to respond, to defend myself, was immense, but I had learned over the years that outward reactions rarely solved anything. Words could inflame, accusations could backfire, and pride could be used against you. I had to wait. I had to watch. The betrayal I felt wasn't just professional. It felt personal. My boss had spoken in front of everyone, undermining me not with facts but with doubt. And yet, when I observed his behavior in meetings, when I tracked the subtle hierarchy of office interactions, I realized he wasn't the only one playing a game I hadn't fully seen. Colleagues who smiled at me often shared private jokes in hushed tones. The assistants I trusted to manage schedules occasionally withheld information, almost imperceptibly. It was as if the entire world around me had layers I hadn't noticed before, layers that had nothing to do with my performance and everything to do with perception, envy, and careful manipulation. I felt the weight of it in a visceral way. Each day, I carried a quiet sadness, not bitter, not angry, just aching. It reminded me of family dinners where my thoughts and ideas were dismissed, or conversations where I had smiled and nodded while inwardly recoiling. It was a familiar loneliness, the kind that comes from realizing that people you care about, or rely on, can wound you without meaning to, or sometimes deliberately. So I chose silence. I smiled. I did my work impeccably, quietly proving myself without fanfare. I sent reports on time, organized meetings flawlessly, and handled even the most difficult requests with calm precision. My outward demeanor was cheerful, professional, unshakable, but inside I was observing everything: the alliances, the subtle betrayals, the shifting dynamics. Every casual comment, every slight hesitation in a handshake, every pause before a reply. All of it told me more than words ever could. And slowly, a new understanding began to settle in me. I realized that my boss's toast, the very thing that had stung so sharply, was a gift in disguise. It forced me to stop relying on others' validation, to pay attention to the world as it was, not as I wished it to be. It forced me to see the truth. Success wasn't just about hard work or talent. It was about quiet observation, measured patience, and knowing your own worth when no one else acknowledged it. By the end of that second week, I had built a kind of internal armor. Not hardened, not bitter, but calm, steady, and observant. I felt stronger than I had in months, more aware, more capable of protecting myself without sacrificing kindness. And then, one quiet Friday morning, my phone buzzed with a message that made my heart skip. It was from the CEO assistant. "Please come to Mr. Langford's office at 2 p.m. He wishes to speak with you privately." I paused, reading the message over and over. A mixture of apprehension and curiosity settled over me. The boss who had doubted me, the colleagues who had whispered, the subtle betrayals, all of it had led to this moment. I didn't know what awaited me, but I knew one thing. I would enter that office calm, composed, and confident. Because for the first time in a long while, I trusted myself more than anyone else's words. The walk to the CEO office felt heavier than it should have. I was calm, steady, but each step echoed with anticipation. My mind replayed every moment from the promotion party, every whispered doubt, every subtle slight I had quietly noted over the past 2 weeks. I wondered what awaited me behind that polished wooden door. Judgment, correction, perhaps even dismissal. And yet, beneath that apprehension, there was a quiet steadiness. I had watched, I had waited, and I was ready to meet whatever truth this conversation would bring. The assistant opened the door, smiled politely, and gestured me inside. Mr. Langford, the CEO, was sitting behind his massive desk, notepad and pen at hand, eyes thoughtful. He motioned for me to sit, and the air between us felt deliberately calm, almost ceremonial. No applause, no small talk, just the weight of something important waiting to be spoken. "Thank you for coming, Claire," he began. His voice was measured, steady, kind but serious. "I wanted to speak with you privately because there are things you should know about the recent events surrounding your promotion and the team dynamics." I nodded, keeping my hands folded on my lap. There was no nervous twitch, no need to defend myself. I had learned to speak through observation, not reaction. He leaned back, eyes studying me carefully. "You've probably noticed certain tensions within the team. Some of it is typical office politics, nothing unusual, but there's also been a history here you might not be aware of. Your boss. He has a way of testing people, sometimes harshly. That toast at your party, it wasn't just a careless insult. It was, in a way, a measure. He wanted to see your response under scrutiny, and he underestimated you." I blinked. The words settled differently than I expected. It wasn't vindication, not really. It was an explanation, quiet and measured, that allowed the truth to breathe. "Mr. Langford continued, "I've been observing your work closely since the promotion. Not just the results, but how you handle people, how you manage stress, how you maintain integrity under pressure. It's rare, Claire. People with your level of patience and emotional intelligence are, well, they're exactly the kind of leaders we want for the company. Your boss's doubts, while unkind in delivery, didn't go unnoticed here. I wanted to make sure you knew that." For a moment, I felt something I hadn't expected, a gentle relief, almost a quiet validation. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that warms from within. It was recognition without spectacle, respect without humiliation. He set down his pen and looked at me directly. "That's why I'm offering you something important. A new project, one that is pivotal to our company's future. You'll have autonomy, resources, and the freedom to lead it as you see fit. I trust your judgment completely. Consider this not just a promotion in title, but a responsibility and an opportunity to shape the team in a way that aligns with your values. I felt my chest tighten. The culmination of weeks of observation, of silent endurance, of emotional resilience, was reflected not in confrontation but in trust. He handed me a folder with the project details, and I took it, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Not just paper, but acknowledgement, validation, and belief in my capability. I understand this may come as a surprise, he added softly, but the truth is, many people underestimate you, some intentionally, some without realizing it. How you respond is what matters, and I've seen enough to know that you respond with calm, intelligence, and dignity. I didn't speak immediately. Words felt unnecessary. Instead, I allowed a quiet smile to rise, the kind that carried both relief and pride, not pride in arrogance, but pride in self-respect, in endurance, in maintaining integrity when others faltered. "Thank you," I said finally, voice steady. "I won't let you, or anyone down." He nodded, and for a moment, silence filled the office in a comforting way. It wasn't tense or awkward. It was a pause that carried understanding, a recognition that quiet resilience had its own rewards. As I left the office, folder in hand, I walked with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. The team dynamics, the whispered doubts, the small betrayals, they were still there, and they always would be, but their power over me had changed. I realized that dignity, patience, and observation weren't passive. They were strength. And for the first time, I felt fully capable of turning that strength into real opportunity. I didn't need to humiliate anyone, didn't need to shout my vindication. Quiet competence, careful observation, and unwavering self-respect had done what words and anger never could. And in that silence I felt a profound sense of justice, not the kind imposed on others, but the kind that settles inside, steady and complete, when you finally recognize your own worth. The days that followed the meeting with Mr. Langford were different, not immediately outwardly, but in the way the air felt around me, in the way my own steps seemed lighter, steadier, more purposeful. I still arrived early, still organized every detail, still smiled politely at colleagues who had once whispered or doubted me, but I carried something intangible now, a quiet certainty that no one could undermine. I watched my boss carefully, as I had learned to do. There was a subtle shift in his demeanor, though he would never admit it. The smirk was gone, replaced with a neutral politeness. He offered guidance, yes, but without condescension, without the testing that had cut me so deeply at the promotion party. I realized then that people often adjust when they encounter someone who doesn't react to their games in expected ways. My calm, steady approach had become my shield, my quiet power. The project itself was more demanding than anything I had worked on before. It required long hours, careful coordination, and creative thinking under pressure, but for the first time, I felt truly in control of my work environment. I made decisions that aligned with my principles, prioritized transparency and respect in my team, and fostered an atmosphere where quiet competence was recognized over empty posturing. Slowly, the team began to trust me, not because I demanded it, but because I observed, acted fairly, and led without ego. Even outside of work, the lessons lingered. Family interactions, once complicated and fraught with unspoken judgments, now carried less weight. I recognized patterns I had once ignored. Favoritism disguised as casual advice, subtle undermining in polite smiles, the occasional disregard for boundaries. I no longer absorbed these slights silently as weakness. Instead, I acknowledged them, adjusted my expectations, and acted with dignity, never escalating, but never submitting either. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment reviewing project notes, I realized how much had changed in me. I no longer felt the need to prove myself to everyone around me. Recognition wasn't validation, it was merely acknowledgement. My confidence wasn't loud, it was quiet, rooted in the knowledge that I could navigate the world with patience, observation, and integrity. My worth wasn't defined by others' opinions, but by my own resilience and ethical choices. A week later, the CEO stopped by my office unannounced. "I wanted to see how things are going," he said. He scanned the progress charts, nodded thoughtfully, then paused. "Claire, I have to say I knew you were capable, but watching you handle this project has been remarkable. You've not only delivered results, but you've built trust and respect quietly, without drama or spectacle. That is rare." I felt a warmth rise in my chest, not from praise, but from recognition that my approach, the quiet strength, the measured patience, had not gone unnoticed. I smiled softly and said, "Thank you. I've learned that quiet actions often speak louder than words. It's made all the difference." By then, my relationship with my boss had shifted subtly. There were no apologies, no admissions of past errors, none were necessary. His tone had softened, his respect was cautious but evident. I understood that dignity doesn't need acknowledgement from those who once undermined you. It exists independently, carried quietly, and commands its own authority. Months later, the project concluded successfully, exceeding expectations. My team celebrated not with loud fanfare, but with quiet satisfaction in shared accomplishment. I felt a profound sense of calm as I looked around the room, not pride born of ego, but contentment born of integrity, resilience, and careful observation. I had achieved success on my own terms, and no one could diminish it. Walking home that evening, I thought about the promotion party, about the sting of words, about the smirk that had once made my chest tighten. I realized that moment had been a turning point. It had forced me to see people as they were, not as I wished them to be, to trust myself more than anyone else, and to develop patience, emotional strength, and self-respect. I had learned that boundaries were not just necessary, they were essential. Respect is not given, it is earned and maintained quietly, calmly, without drama. Sitting by my window, city lights twinkling in the distance, I felt a profound inner peace. The world still had its complications, its betrayals, its subtle tests, but I had changed. I had become someone who could navigate them with grace, intelligence, and quiet dignity. I realized finally that true emotional justice isn't about revenge or humiliation. It's about living with integrity, holding boundaries firmly, and trusting your own strength. And in that quiet understanding, I smiled, because I had survived the test, and in doing so, I had found something no one could ever take from me, myself.